Thank you guys so much. We'll just jump right into it. The first question I have is, what are some of the key issues in the Ferguson case, and how do they relate to or represent societal issues as a whole?
Well, I guess I'll start since everyone is itching to get in. You know, the Ferguson situation is problematic on many levels. I mean, you have a community which is about 70% black or people of color, a police department that has 3 black police officers out of 53. You have a mayor that feels there's no racial problems in the city at all. You have a situation, I think, that's totally, almost surreal in terms of most of us that live in other parts of the country. However, there are other Fergusons. So the situation there to me was just, it just shows how far, we still have to go in terms of race relations. There are people that had no problem with the fact that, a person that was unarmed was shot 12 times, and they kept on talking about, well, he was a thug anyway. Well, what does that have to do with a person walking down the street, unarmed and being gunned down? You had a prosecutor that was heavily conflicted, but yet he refused to recuse himself. And when people didn't accept the verdict that happened, they react surprised. You had a governor that had a chance to appoint a special prosecutor, but he didn't show leadership and do what he felt should have been the right thing to do for his state. So on many levels, it was just a laboratory for a disaster that was ready to happen, and it happened. So, it's just so sad on so many levels that we still have places like Ferguson in America, but we do, and we need to get used to the fact that those places exist, and we have to do something as individuals and collectively to change the Ferguson so that we have a better America. We can no longer think that it's somebody else's problem. It's all of our problem. We are all inextricably linked as long as we're in this country. We got to get to know that and get used to that. It's not the other person. You're involved, and you need to take a position one way or the other. If you're not part of the solution, then you're part of the problem. And that's what I have to say about that.
What I would say from being in the law enforcement field for 36 years, what I found from all the media coverage from Ferguson, it was clear that there was a high percentage of that community that felt that the police had completely lost touch to what they were supposed to do for the community. It was, from all the media, it was an us against them situation. The police were not acting correctly from my perspective. They weren't partnering with the parts of the community, and they completely lost touch of understanding what the community needed. And that's, if anything positive to come out of Ferguson, is that the police department needs to understand their community and partner with different communities within the community to get a better solution to the problems.
I think that the Ferguson uprising and the protests against it represent the anger people have of state violence and the sanctioning of state violence. The most clear example I can use to illustrate this is I look at it, the difference between police and security guards. Security guards, most of the times, are unarmed, and when security guards confront people trying to, make them abide by the rules that have been set by the particular entity, let's take RISD for example. Kids skateboard at RISD. The RISD ledges are one of the most famous spots in Providence as far as skateboarding, and I'm pretty sure security has come and kicked a few guys out for skateboarding. Guys I've talked to, when I'm at the skate park, we'll be going back and forth casually, and then we'll bring up skating in the city. I got kicked out of the RISD ledges, but we clowned the security guard because he didn't have a gun. But on the other hand, the interactions with police, they're allowed to carry guns. They're sanctioned and have the training to inflict this violence on people. And I think that we need to take a critical look at this, because this isn't a new phenomenon, you know what I mean? Law enforcement has had the backing of of the state behind them to carry out this violence for a while. You know, for another example, the Fugitive Slave Act, the slave catchers who they sent out to get those slaves had the full backing and protection of the law, and and to think that those are the ideas that have driven the laws have gone away just because we've addressed the problems through legislation and not the attitudes of the people who drafted those legislations is ridiculous to me. And I think that we do need to take a look at systemic ideas, but we also need to have a bigger cultural shift and and so that we can find a way to change not only systematic problems but cultural problems.
I'll add something. I feel like the issues in Ferguson, it's multiple parts: disconnected the community, police officers not connecting the community, having conversations, dialogue, and I feel like in our society we place police officers and people in positions of power to this degree where they become untouchable. Everything that they've done is justified, but we lose this sense of accountability and being able to critique and look at their actions and basically say, well, these actions were justified, but he's a police officer, so it's okay. But we should be able to criticize, and because they are in these positions of power, where if they make a mistake compared to our mistakes, their mistakes cost people lives. So we should hold them accountable to a higher degree because they have these positions of power, because they have these weapons, because they're the difference between life and death. And so we should be able to criticize them and expect them to treat people equally, to look at people without implicit bias, to assume things about individuals. And that's the disconnect with the community where people feel like they're being targeted. And so we need to have those discussions about implicit bias, about issues of race and class, because I feel like that's part of one of the biggest issues: race, class, people being targeted in these communities, specifically for those identities.
And like, I think in this kind of miscommunication that you're speaking of, it's like, I mean, to Mr. Vincent's point, your point, I feel like there is a vicious cycle, right? You can look at the images that happened in the 1960s and look at the images that happened in Ferguson, and they look identical. Like, besides the pyramids, which is so terrible, right? There's no progress being made. And I think that's one of the main things that Ferguson highlighted, is that there's still such a high tension around race issues, around respect for the police, but around authority. Like, there's so much that we're not talking about, and no one's communicating, and no one's listening. And that's the issue that, like, these issues keep happening because no one's actually, like, sitting down trying to have productive conversation.